Welcome to the latest edition of our webinar series. Today we are going to be focusing on part two of our two-part project management series, electrical work. If you haven't gone back and watched the previous webinar in the series where we discuss roofing and ground mounts, you can find that webinar and all of the recent webinars we've completed in the brand new video library feature in Lightspeed. So when you log into Lightspeed, you'll see a new option on the bottom of the sidebar with video library. The first showcase we've published is this webinar series. It's a great place to check out some of our previous product education offerings. And as always, if you have any suggestions for future webinars, you can always email us at producteducation@freedomforever.com. About midway through this presentation, you'll see the question option to appear. This is where you'll be able to ask questions for our Q&A session at the end. Today, we are joined by Matt Markham and Zach Doherty, as well as Rob Angel and Henry Boucher and Brian Malott to answer whatever questions you have at the end of this presentation. So let's get moving. My name is Mark Lennox. I am the host of our webinar series and the product education manager at Freedom Forever. Excited to present this material to you today. We're hopeful that this will address many of the common questions that are fielded regarding MPUs and electrical work. So let's look at the agenda. Okay, so we're going to kick off this webinar by getting started with main panel upgrade red flags and some of the alternatives. We'll also go over some of the key terms and definitions. Then we'll follow up with the MPU process itself, as well as main panel upgrade timelines and materials. We'll spend some time talking about costs and adders, and then we will wrap up by talking about the different storage options and the EV wall chargers that we have. Again, we will spend the remainder of the time in a Q&A session, and as a reminder, you will see a Q&A appear about halfway through the presentation, and you can start submitting questions to be answered by our subject matter experts that have joined us today. So first, let's talk about some MPU red flags and alternatives. Here's a quick overview of some of the acronyms and definitions, things that are commonly associated with electrical work here. Okay, so you'll see MPU, that stands for main panel upgrade. If you see MSB, that's main service breaker. MSP is main service panel. POI is point of interconnection. CE will stand for construction engineering. And Q&E will be for our quality and estimation team. So some of the key definitions that we see with these electrical works is, like, what is a D rate? So a D rate is replacing a 200 amp breaker with one rated for a lower amount, typically 150 or 175 amps. If you see on adders your line side tap, that's the wires from the inverter connected to the service wires on the line side of the circuit breaker. And a load side tap is a load side connection involving a circuit breaker connected to the solar inverter output to the main service panel. And last, a meter adapter is an electric meter socket adapter that will accept a wired connection directly from a residential customer's PV solar generation system. So what are some of the main MPU red flags and triggers that will occur that will start the MPU process? The first one we'll talk about is safety red flags. There are certain panel brands that are an automatic trigger. If the panel is a Federal Pacific panel or a Pushmatic panel, this triggers a red flag. Additionally, any fused panels or main breakers trigger a safety red flag. If the main panel has corrosion, rust, water damage, or enclosure damage, that can also trigger a safety red flag. Another example of a trigger is the equipment condition, or a code red flag. If there are unserviceable, like lack of parts, for panels that just no longer exist and you can't get the parts for them anymore, then that's going to trigger an MPU. If the panel has like unpermitted work that you can see they did not see a permit, or there's a code violation, or there's specific utility standards that can get an MPU red flagged. And additionally, if there's a backfeed that exceeds allowable maximums, that's going to trigger a red flag. So let's take a look at a couple of visual aids, one of my favorites, on this next slide. So what is an example of a code violation? Some issues are easier to spot than others. So for instance, if you see a main panel in a bathroom, chances are you have a code violation. And below here are examples of like those unusable panels, the fused main panels, the FPE panels, and a pushmatic. And then on the right side here, you'll see damaged equipment like rust and corrosion. So, what are some MPU avoidable situations? Avoidable MPUs are triggers that may be solved with alternative scopes of work. These are not always possible solutions, but when they are allowable, this can help avoid an MPU. So, if there is insufficient capacity, that can be solved with a D-rate, a meter adapter, a sub-panel insert, or a line-side tap. And remember, we talked about all those definitions earlier in the presentation. You can go back and watch them or ask them in the Q&A if you need reminders of what those are. Code violations can be solved with repairs if it's possible, or if there's been unpermitted work, you can get a permit that permits that non-permitted equipment. So what does the MPU process look like? So what happens in this MPU process, and what if my project needs an MPU? Well, post-site survey, this will trigger construction engineering to review the processes based on those triggers we talked about in the previous slide. The quality and estimation team will determine if the MPU is avoidable. And even if a customer requests an MPU, QE will check if it's avoidable and determine the scope, cost, and avoidance. So if the MPU is unavoidable, QE will provide a detailed scope of work for the main panel upgrade to be included in the design and contract, and determine if a third party will be required to hard quote those costs. There's either going to be an internal or an external estimate for that project. Once the scope of work are determined, there will be a deliverable sent to account management to be included in that scope of work. After the scope of work is approved, the MPU will move to coordination to be completed by a Freedom electrician or a subcontractor. So once it's at MPU coordination and the scope of work is confirmed, the project moves to the electrical coordinator who reviews the details. During this phase, there is possibility for unforeseen items that can cause MPU costs to be a little bit higher than expected. Some examples are like structural modifications, if the utility itself requires that MPU to be relocated, if the AHJ requires additional repairs to the load side, or if the AHJ or utility requires special equipment. From here, the work is either designated to be completed by that Freedom Forever contractor, or the bid is procured to a subcontractor. Now, in the next slide, we're going to talk about timelines for this process. So what are the MPU timelines of materials? What happens from here? Once that project has been picked up by an internal team or a subcontractor, it moves to the permitting stage. A permit can take anywhere from 1 to 30 plus days depending on the AHGA or utility. Once that permit is received, the homeowner is contacted to schedule that electrical work. Once the work is completed, a proof of completion is provided, and then any punch list items are addressed. Then it moves into the inspection phase. An inspection is scheduled, and at times, depending on the AHJ and utility, there can be up to 3 inspections scheduled for that one MPU. If there are any repairs necessary, like stucco work, they'll be completed after the inspection. Then it moves on to final inspection, where the inspection is completed and the project moves forward. So based on those timelines, the MPU process, and the materials, let's take a few minutes to talk about the costs and the adders and just explain that process for MPU costs. So the MPU baseline, the $3,000 adder that's on the adder sheet, includes the labor and the material to remove and reinstall the same or new equipment in the same location with little to no repairs required by the surrounding structure, and to replace existing loads and add an additional load for the PV system. The national average for this base work is about $3,000, but some markets are specialty and the baseline cost for the MPU is higher than that by an average of 16 to 25%. If there's other work, that's assessed separately. So the most common miscellaneous adders include, but are not limited to, dropping new service conductors, overhead service, mast installation replacement, and refeeding feeder conductors. Repair work is assessed outside of the baseline scope as well. So where unusual equipment is needed, like additional material costs are added for 400 amps, commercial equipment, or arc fault breakers. And then relocations, of course, are their own adder and can range from 500 to 3,000 when the relocation work is considered standard, i.e. back to back, same wall, exterior to exterior location with overhead service drop. Relocations require penetrating interior walls, like walls not on the outside perimeter, and longer relocations or trench work can lead to higher costs, and the scope can be utility dependent. So that's an overview of the cost of MPUs and where some of the additional costs may come from. So let's spend a few moments as we wrap up this portion of the webinar to talk about storage and electric vehicle options. Inside of Lightspeed, there is the storage selection guide. This can be accessed either directly in Lightspeed on the storage side. You'll see on the left-hand side there's that little battery button. The number of batteries needed will be based on the load selected here. So when going over storage options with homeowners, refer to the adder sheet for current battery offerings, and then go over this storage guide with them to see how many batteries they may need. Battery projects can have miscellaneous battery adders, and those are located on the adder sheet as well. There are up to 2 subpanels included in each battery project if needed. So what about EV chargers? So the current EV charger that we use is the Generation 3 Tesla EV charger. That began in December of 2022, and that's for all new customers. So which vehicles can be charged with this Tesla wall connector? There are 2 Tesla wall connector versions, one for Tesla vehicles and one for all other vehicles that use that J1772 connector. So when you're with your customer, you'll be provided with the correct type depending on the vehicle that customer will be charging with. This information is typically gathered during site survey. So because of that, homeowners will need to be present at site survey to get access to the interior of the home, primarily the electrical panels and appliances. The surveyor will also need to discuss and identify where the charger will be installed and which vehicle types will be charged. So what other costs may be incurred during the installation of EV chargers? Some site conditions may necessitate additional labor and materials to install. This will be charged on a project-by-project basis. And some examples include unit installation 50 feet from the point of connection and main panel upgrades due to the added loading from that EV charger. So now we are pretty much done with this portion of the webinar. We are going to move to the Q&A. So let's go ahead and get that Q&A started. Throughout this presentation, you should have seen the question bar appear, and we're going to bring some of your questions on board, and we'll bring in our panel to answer those questions now. All right, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for viewing our presentation for MPUs. We're going to move on now to the Q&A and approve our first question. And we will send that to the screen here now. So the first question, and again, if you see on the Q&A side, you should be able to answer questions and send them in, and we'll approve them and get them answered by our panel. The first question, I believe this one's going to be for Rob, is what happens if an MPU is called after the SOW is accepted? Who covers that cost? Or right?
Yeah, hey guys, morning. Rob here. I appreciate the question. Thanks everybody for being here. So generally the policy, I know these are very disruptive for you guys out on the sales team, but I think the reality is some things just can't be foreseen. And so we do everything we can to understand the exact scenario and the exact site conditions at site audit and kind of going into install. But again, the reality is sometimes there's something that comes up on site, or there's some change or other factor involved that prompts us to make changes at install or post install. And so again, we put a lot of care and a lot of time into trying to foresee those and call those out at site audit, but it is kind of a fine line between being a little bit too aggressive or too conservative on the front end versus install and vice versa. So the short answer here is the policy generally is that if it were a factor or scenario that kind of couldn't be foreseen, we typically do add those to the scope of work and charge them as adders. There are some scenarios where freedom would be at fault, or there would be some other extenuating circumstance where those adders could be waived, at least a certain portion of them. But generally, the policy is that they are added to the scope of work.
Thanks, Rob. And this next question is going to be for Zach. I'll bring it up on the screen now. Why are we having a large amount of MPUs happening after install and after SOW approval? What is being done so this isn't happening?
Thanks for the question, Kristen. Yeah, so I think this is kind of a complex question with a few different ways that we can answer it. Typically, when we see, depending on the location, when we see these late ads, they could be triggered by HJs or inspectors, or in some cases, the utility will require things that we just weren't aware of or didn't know. On our end, though, to fix that, when we see these callouts or these late ads, we'll update our databases internally so that we don't miss them in future states. Pretty much is how we're handling that across the board. And in other instances, we have an opportunity to back with our construction engineering team to just kind of go through some retrain and reviews to help flag these better initially up front when we see them. If they're not, just a little like process background, if these are not flagged at the construction review stage for the quality and estimation team, then they won't be called out or reviewed for the MPU or to validate that MPU. So in some cases you might see this, but generally speaking, we would need a little more context about the location of where we're seeing these additional MPUs being called out post SOW and kind of dig in on a deeper dive. So please feel free to reach out directly, to project support specialists, and we can dig in if we're seeing those issues. We want to make sure that we're not having that problem.
Thanks, Zach. And this next question is for Matt. We'll bring it up on screen now. And that is that battery estimator accurate in the portal?
Yeah, thanks. So the battery estimator is based on a bunch of averages of consumer appliances around the country, people's actual appliances, people's actual usage. Has a very, very broad spectrum. So really be impossible to make it absolutely accurate. Is that it's a guide to point people in the right direction for a system that's going to work for them. So essentially, we want plugs, things like that. One battery should suffice for them. People that want larger appliances, air conditioners, pumps, water heaters, things like that, recommend two. And people that want, to be able to operate their whole home, typically is going to push them into that 3 or greater. So it's really intended as a guide, not as an exact kind of detailed estimator. It is based on some averages.
Appreciate that, Matt. Our next question comes from Alex, and that is, if a customer wants a larger, say a 400 versus a 225 amp MPU than needed, can we accommodate that?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so historically we've accommodated based on the circumstances, but I think a couple of important things to note. If it's not required, we typically want to avoid doing that MPU altogether. But if they are requiring if the MPU is required and we are requesting if we can do a larger upgrade attached to that, then that is something that we can definitely accommodate in the scope. We want to give the customer what it is that they're looking for. But something to note is in that circumstance, the cost from a 225 to a 400 amp and the availability of that equipment in these days is going to be high and hard to come by. So that's something that's really important to note. Additionally, there may be more costs incurred by the customer directly on those. Freedom isn't going to share in a customer requested unnecessary upgrade to something like a 400 amp panel unless it's absolutely required for the install.
Thank you, Zach. Our next question is from Jason, and it is span electrical panel. Are we going to roll this out as an option? I think that one's going to go to Rob.
I think Matt actually can take that one.
Yeah, I'll take that. That's all right. So yeah, Span's an interesting product. We've talked to Span quite a bit. We've done several pilots. It is something that we're considering. At this time, it's not a current offering, but I would say that we have done, like I said, some extensive piloting and examination of the product. So could very well be something that we do offer in the future.
Thanks, Matt. We're going to grab another question here in just a moment. Let me go through the ones that are still pending. Okay, our next question is from Matt, and that is, when already paying for a full MPU and relocation, what is an AFCI breaker, and why does it cost $2,200, nearly the cost of the panel upgrade itself? I think that one's good for Matt, if you could take that one.
Yeah, sure. This is a tricky. Typically, you'd only see this come in when we have to do a relocation. So the electrical code will allow us to upgrade a service in the same place without bringing all of the breakers and the circuits up to the current code standards. As soon as we have to relocate that more than 6 feet, we're required to bring that up to code, which includes a significant number of AFCI breakers. AFCI breakers are typically somewhere in the realm of 10 to 20 times the cost of a normal breaker. So it does add considerable cost.
Okay, thanks, Matt. All right, our next question is from Brian. We'll send that up on screen. When we see miscellaneous fee adders, what exactly would that entail? I'm going to kick that over to Rob. Rob, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so generally if there's a miscellaneous adder, a lot of times you'll see some more notes in the adder section, or excuse me, in the scope of work notes. You're going to see some more detail there. You can also refer to a lot of times the bid itself or the kind of the estimate is included in the project files. Oftentimes you can refer to that as well. I will say just a couple general things here as we kind of look at some of these questions and talk through this. I think one point worth making, and I think Matt may be able to expand on this and Zach as well, is that these some of these topics that we're talking about are not simple, right? I think speaking at least for myself, coming from the sales world myself, and having sold in the home, we think everything is very clear, black and white. This needs an MPU or this doesn't, or this needs this type of work or it doesn't. And I think the reality of it is it's just not always that simple. It's not always that black and white. There's a lot of different ways to look at these things. There's a lot of different opinions. You ask 10 different electricians to look at one job, and they're going to give you, 5 or 10 different opinions on the type of work that needs to get done or how it can get done. So, I just want to have that in the back of your minds. I think, there are ways that there are different ways to look at things depending on, experience level or just the situation, safety. There's ways that you can get a little bit more aggressive, a little bit less aggressive. And I think, the freedom teams between the construction engineering team, the project management team and the install teams, there's kind of a fine balance that everybody's trying to walk of, we're kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't in certain situations where it's like, if we call out an MPU in scope of work, we oftentimes get asked, is there a way to avoid it? But then if we try to avoid it, but then we need it later, then, it's kind of looked at poorly that, we called it out at install and not scope of work. So again, I understand how disruptive some of this stuff can be in the sales team, and I definitely don't discount that at all. But the general point is like, these things can be very complicated and very difficult to make everybody happy all the time. And our team does everything we can to try to balance all of those considerations and make the right decisions throughout the process. But at the end of the day, sometimes things change, and we need to make the best call that we can at the time that we're looking at it with the information that we have in hand. So that's one point. Second point I'll make is that in terms of pricing and adders, we're getting a lot of questions on those and some already that have added. I actually kind of, Mark, if you could throw the question up on the screen that was asked, I kind of forgot as I'm talking here. But in terms of adders, we all know the inflationary environment that we're in right now, and the cost of electrical work has gone up a lot recently in the past year or two. And so, you know, the cost that we're seeing for MPUs has gone up dramatically. And so, you know, when these miscellaneous fees comes up or these miscellaneous items, you know, I think a lot of times that is reflective of the marketplace and the environment and the cost of the work. I think there's not many places right now that you can get an MPU done for the MPU adder that we have today. And so I think it is prudent from a sales perspective when you're factoring in an MPU, just speaking kind of as to some degree, some additional cost above and beyond that MPU adder. I think there are going to be a high percentage of times where there will be some other miscellaneous fee that comes up that you'll need to eat. And so I think to best prepare yourself and your customer for those costs, I do think it is a smart idea, again, to bake in an extra, you know, $1,000 or maybe a little bit more just to make sure that you don't have to go back to the customer later down the line. I think there's always going to be somebody out there who can do something cheaper. You know, there's always going to be a Chuck in a truck who can do an MPU for cheaper. We kind of talked about this a little bit on the roofing call a week or two ago as well. But you know, that's not the one and only consideration for Freedom. We need to find people not only that have good prices, but also that do quality work and you know, communicate well, have good timelines, et cetera, et cetera. So you know, pricing just to recap, pricing has gone up kind of nationwide. Keep that in mind. Price it in properly. Check the scope of work notes. Check the file sections for the bid. You can find more information there about what exactly the scenario is. But hopefully that answers the questions on matters.
Appreciate that, Rob. And our next question is from Jose, and are surge protection devices part of electrical? If so, how can we anticipate them, and are they mandatory? I think that one is a good one.
Yeah, this I kind of would refer back to what Rob was saying at the beginning of the last question. So surge protection devices are now part of the 2020 National Electrical. Previously adopted in other prominent states like Texas and Massachusetts, where we've seen a high adoption rate of protection device. The challenge is that not every AHJ sees, you know, if we are just installing solar, would we need to upgrade it? Most of the time before installing an MPU, you know, it takes when there's a new item that's introduced into the code. Enforcement, you know, sometimes can be delayed, sometimes it cannot be enforced at all. We try to track that with our AHJ database, but there is some trial and error there. So, you know, technically, if you were putting a new service in California, you would be required to put in one of these devices. You know, when we're retrofitting with solar plus storage or an MPU, we may see a variation of requirements there. You know, hence we don't necessarily want to just automatically bake that into the cost if it's an unnecessary expense.
Okay, Matt, I hate to do you back to back here, but we have another good question for you, and that is, can you explain why what a D rate looks like? Give you some details on D rates.
Yeah. So, you know, when we're talking about adding solar to an existing electrical panel, we're essentially adding an additional source. So the normal source is coming through the main breaker. Now we're adding a secondary source. When you add up both of those sources, that's going to allow all of the loads in the home, if they were all on at the same time, to draw the sum of both of those sources. In the code, a very common code that's used, you may have heard of it before, is the 120% rule. It's one of the most prominent rules, and that's basically saying that if this bus bar, say it's a 100 amp bus bar, is having an additional source, you can only add up to 120%. So an additional 20 amps of supply to that before you have to do something else. So effectively what we're doing when we're derating the main breaker is we're not lowering the amount of source and supply. We're basically just splitting the maximum allowable supply between the PV backfeed breaker and the main breaker so that we don't exceed the capacity of the rating of that main panel.
Okay, thank you, Matt. We're going to go to our next question. And let me just get it up on the screen real quick. And this is from Dave. And his question is, when a relocate is anticipated, does the utility make that call? And if the relocation is not as extensive, can the adder be reduced? Rob, I think that's a good one for you.
Yeah, so I'll start and then probably hand it off to Zach to kind of keep me honest here and add more details. So um, I think it depends. There's situations where we look at it and we know that the proximity to the gas line and the particular utility or HA we're in, we look at it and we know that they're going to require it, and so we don't need to ask the utility. We kind of just move forward with it. There are other scenarios where we're not so sure, and so we have to go through kind of a meter spot request process. And I think in some utilities act, this is where I'll tap you in here on most of the stuff. But some utilities, if we're putting in an MPU, we need to have a meter spot done in advance, regardless. So again, sometimes we know, sometimes we don't, and we have to ask the utility. Generally, though, regardless of how we know, whether it's from us or the utility, we like looking at the site, we know where it would need to go and what effort would need to get done to make the relocation happen. So my understanding, Zach, keep me honest, of the process on relocates is that those are all done by bid generally, or not generally, those are all done by bid is my understanding. And that cost would be pretty much locked in. I don't think there's a ton of change in those bids. If anything, they may go up rather than down. But Zach, do you want to add some more detail? Keep me honest on some of this stuff.
Yeah. So essentially, in any markets in California, through Arizona, and then other scattered utilities throughout the nation, a meter spot is a requirement, and so we won't necessarily guess. You know, let me rephrase that. We will make an estimated educated guess on where the relocation will be if we're comfortable and confident with what we're seeing. But in certain circumstances, we have no idea what the outcome will be and what the utility specifically will determine. And I will put an asterisk there. There are even circumstances where we get it wrong, and it seems to be at face value a pretty standard. Hey, we're going to relocate this far, or we should probably only see the relocation impact of X, and the utility comes back to us and says, no way, we need to do all of these, this laundry list of other things and involving trenching and so on and so forth. So on that piece, yeah, we look to the utility to determine where a utility and a meter spot isn't involved. Again, we will look at the general relocation scenario, and if it falls into that like simpler context from the slide deck earlier, where we have like a same wall location, if we're just going to go from inside to outside or vice versa, or maybe just a couple feet over, those are relocations that we will estimate internally. When they get much more involved on that, and we have to go into the house, or we've got to relocate to the other side of a property, or we're anticipating those things, and we don't have the utility to fall back on to determine that, we will get a hard quote from a subcontractor. And so predominantly, most of the time we'll see those. And yeah, and to your point about like, are those costs locked in? They are locked in. Very rarely are we gonna see an opportunity where our relocate costs will be adjusted down, or lowered. And if there were a circumstance where we may potentially entertain that, we would wait for the entire scope of the electrical work to be completed. Because of the unforeseen nature of construction work in general, we may not necessarily know till the job is totally 100% complete that there were no additional or extra costs associated to it. And so I think that's in the best protection of everybody involved. We just kind of leave those costs alone for as long as possible on those. Hopefully those answers are helpful.
Okay, great. if it is, can you hear me now?
Yep, we get you now.
All right. If it is found that an MPU is needed after install and we find a licensed electrician to do it, can we call off Freedom Forever from doing it? I think that's for you, Rob.
Yeah, I'll take it, and then likewise, I'll probably dish it over to Zach and maybe Matt to make sure to keep me honest here. So I think it's a customer's house. We can't tell a customer not to do something on their house. If they wanted to do their own MPU, who are we to say you can't do it? That said, just like we talked about last week with roof work, and some of the other adders that or some of the other work types that we've talked about, if it's being done as a part of the solar agreement and financed by, the solar loan, if there is one, or, the solar financing, it's got to be quarterbacked by Freedom. It's got to go through us and one of our approved subcontractors. So if we show up and call out an MPU, customer wants to go get it done by their own electrician. Yes, I mean, again, like I said, who are we to say no? It's their house; they can do what they want. We would effectively, we first of all, we don't recommend it because we want to make sure that what we need to get the solar done is done, and it's done properly. It's done with high quality work, and it kind of meets our specs. So we wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But who are we to say that the customer can't do what they want to do to their own house? We would effectively, just like we do with a customer completing their own roof work, we'd open up a ticket. We typically assign that to sales, and we'll essentially kind of put the project on pause until we have done what we need done to proceed. So you guys would be in contact with the homeowner. They let you know when the work is done. You resolve that ticket. We'll, I think at that point would probably prompt another site audit to take a look, make sure we understand the site conditions, and then move forward from there. Zach or Matt, do you want to confirm my understanding there?
Yeah, that's yes, that I confirm. So essentially, I love this question. This kind of issue has been coming up and bubbling up a lot lately around the preferred electrical contractor and who is the electrical contractor. I mean, I think as a standard, it's important to keep in mind that that is Freedom's bread and butter. We are the electrical contractor. We are, we're installing the PV. We're the operations front. Our electrical licenses are on the permits that we submit. It's electrical. Long story short, electrical is integral to what we do. It is what we do. So and I think there was another question that Kristen threw out there, so I'll kind of shoot from the hip here. In terms of like, what do we do about in-house MPUs versus subcontract MPUs? It's like, as a standard, it is our preference to do as much work in-house as we possibly can. So that's always our first step in consideration for the electrical work around a project. And so I think that kind of helps the context here. If you find a contractor that will do the work and you call us off, I mean, Rob kind of nailed it. If it's on our financing and a part of the financing model, and we've permitted and it's part of our licensing, and it's all interconnected, we're gonna want to retain the right to do the electrical work that's associated with the project. I think it's important as to consider something like roofing. Roofing isn't what we do. We get on roofs and we install PV, but like we're not a roofing outfit. And so in those conversations, it's a little easier to we have a little more give in like who we decide does the roof work and working with our dealers and just kind of having those conversations. But yeah, I just want to double down on electrical work is what Freedom does, and if there's some reason that we can't complete a scope or we don't have the capacity. I mean, the things that we're considering when we schedule electrical work, our ability, our capacity, soonest dates and timelines, as well as costs. And there's a lot that goes into it. We're trying to get these things done as quickly as possible. And so in some instances, while we would prefer to do it in-house, we might have a trusted subcontractor that we work with, that we work closely with to get a job completed, if it means getting that job to PTO quicker.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Zach. We're going to go to a question from Ferris, and it is, can you please provide an overview of the customer experience? Do they receive an itemized quote? Is the work itemized in the change order? I'm going to kick that one over to Rob.
Yeah, so I think this is a really good one because this helps, clarify to some degree the responsibilities here of Freedom and reps. And I think this is one that there's historically been some kind of confusion about, and I think we can work together between Freedom and our independent reps to kind of sync up better on this. But in terms of the confirmation of the scope of work, I would really bucket this in, kind of define this as confirming the scope of work, right? So it's like if we call out an MPU, like that's something that should be discussed between the sales rep and the homeowner while discussing the scope of work, right? That 24 hours that we give you guys to confirm that scope of work, that's not just for you to look at it and say, great, looks good. It's also for you to have that conversation with your homeowners. And it's to be able to go through the various kind of adders or pricing or different, things that are going to come up throughout the install. So in terms of the customer experience here, I kind of would put that back on you guys to some degree where, when we have a project with an MPU where the scope of work has been confirmed, we're expecting that conversation generally has been had by the sales rep as a part of the scope of work confirmation. And so when we call them up, we're calling them up to schedule them. Sometimes we will have an initial conversation, especially with, something more like roof work. There may be a conversation about preferences or whatever, but generally, they're going to get a call to schedule it. And at that point, hopefully they're not hearing for the first time that we need an MPU, right? We do put that in the bucket of sales responsibility, and that's not because that's really because like historically our sales reps have wanted to have that conversation. You are the ones who generally are determining pricing and kind of scope for the project, and so it makes a lot of sense for sales reps to have that conversation. I'm sure there's some of you out there that probably disagree and would love to would prefer to have Freedom have that conversation, but that is kind of the role of sales reps today. So, as I stated before, there are some other resources that you can use when this additional work comes up. The PM team and the CE team will pretty much always include the estimate and the bid, whether it's from a subcontractor or kind of a Freedom internal, and kind of part of the RFP that we would send to the subcontractors and the scope of what needs to get done. We're going to include those in the project files. So I would very much recommend that if you need to have this conversation with a homeowner and you're looking for more information on what's going on, check the project files first. If you don't get what you need, you can also chat sales concierge, see if they can get some additional information from the PE team or the PM team or the CE team, to kind of back up that work, get a little bit more information. If you guys don't know the answer, like we definitely want you to ask. We don't want our homeowners in the dark not knowing what's going on, but we do generally view that as kind of the sales responsibility during the scope of work confirm step.
All right. Thanks, Rob. This next question is from Jason, and it is, can we please have a training on the rebates and incentives process? Customers always ask, and I would like to have more detail. That's certainly something that we can put on the calendar as we grow our webinar series and conduct future trainings. So we will add that. Any questions like this where you want to see additional trainings, we also encourage you to email us at producteducation@freedomforever.com, and we will build out our calendar for the next 2 months. We'll be coming right around the corner with new sessions in February and March. Also, we do want to point everyone in the direction of the new video library. I know we mentioned this at the onset of the webinar, but inside of Lightspeed on the sidebar, there is a video library that you'll be able to access for the recent webinars we've completed, including part 1 of this series on roofing and ground mounts. So we've pretty much reached the end of our Q&A. I do want to thank Rob and Matt and Zach and Brian for being here and answering questions as they've come in. Again, we will be sending out a link to this